Actor Armie Hammer was at the top of his career before it all came crashing down following an onslaught of disturbing sexual assault allegations. Writer James Kirchick wrote in detail about Hammer's downfall, and he's here with us today to break it all down. Good to have you with us, and you actually spoke to Armie Hammer for this excellent piece. Tell us about how it came to be and what you've learned from speaking to him. Obviously, this was someone who was aggressively MeToo'd, canceled, whatever word you want to describe it. And I think myself, maybe some other people have questions about exactly how specific the accusations against him have been. So talk to us about this piece.
Yeah, so I was approached last fall through an intermediary and with the opportunity to interview Armie Hammer for the first time since these allegations emerged over 2 years ago in January 2021. He hasn't spoken to the media at all. And I think what attracted me to this was that there have been no criminal charges filed or civil suits filed. And in fact, the main accuser, the woman who's accused him of rape, a woman named Efrosina Angelova, has reportedly not signed an affidavit under penalty of perjury. And her lawyer, Gloria Allred, dropped her as a client last fall. So when someone is accused of very serious crimes in public, and these accusations are trotted out in the media, and their career is destroyed and their reputation is destroyed, and yet there's been no legal adjudication of any of these allegations, that naturally interested me as a journalist, and I wanted to find out more.
So Hammer's talent agency dropped him in February of 2021, I guess shortly after the allegations arose. He was dropped from a movie the following March, The $1 Million Spy, and several other projects. Help us understand the nature of the allegations that led to such kind of a swift reprisal for him professionally.
So it started with leaks, direct messages that showed Hammer expressing his desire and his interest in various sexual fetishes. And the most outrageous of these were cannibalism fetishes. And he was writing that he wanted to, eat various body parts and cook them and whatnot. And then over the ensuing weeks, 2 other women who had had relationships with Hammer said that they had basically been pressured into participating in various BDSM behaviors. But they noticeably were kind of vague on whether or not these were consensual, because again, there were no criminal or civil charges filed. And then in March, so about 2 months after the first allegations emerged from this woman, Angelova, who I mentioned earlier, she then came out and said that, in fact, Hammer had raped her 4 years earlier in 2017, over the course of 4 hours, that he had repeatedly banged her head against a wall, that he had taken a riding crop and beaten her feet, the soles of her feet, so that she couldn't walk for a week. And the more I looked into this, the more questions I had. For one, Hammer seriously injured his pectoral muscle a couple of months before this rape occurred. He was in a sling. He shared with me medical records documenting that he had physical therapy sessions the day before and the day after this rape took place. I spoke with one of his doctors who told me that the healing period for this injury would have been 4 to 6 months, which is in the time frame that this alleged rape occurred. And then it wasn't until about 1.5 years after this injury that Hammer could go back to lifting weights again. And we know that because he tweeted about it in the summer of 2018. So this left me questioning whether or not it would have even been physically possible for a man to violently rape a woman for over 4 hours without the use of his dominant limb. I think that should raise some serious questions about this. I also obtained messages that Angelova was exchanging with Hammer's estranged wife, Elizabeth Chambers, before she went public with these accusations of rape, in which she was telling Chambers that she was chasing Hammer, she was, following him, she was pursuing him, and she was apologizing for, really causing a rupture in the marriage. There were other messages, private DMs between Angelova and other people on Instagram in the days leading up to her going public, in which she said in her own words that their sexual relationship was consensual, that he didn't rape anybody, that there was no violence. So she's given a very kind of contradictory message privately. Publicly, she's telling a very different story. But again, all of these conflicting reports have never really been covered by the media until now. I think this is really a story about the media falling into line, about the kind of herd mentality of the media, and the media not really showing skepticism of these claims.
Yeah, I think the thing that captured the public's attention was this idea that Armie Hammer, who is a very kind of clean-cut looking leading man type figure, was engaged in cannibalism and BDSM and things that were sexually unusual kinks, as it were. But it did seem that the story really stayed in that place, leading some people to ask, is he being censored for simply liking kinky but consensual activity? And I think some of the conflicting statements from the women have continued to raise concerns that he's basically being kink shamed out of the public sphere. I will say, however, I don't know that I think that the evidence about him having an arm in a sling is especially dispositive, given that he is a 6'5", strong, capable person, and many men who are not that strong or that big overpower women, and rape is not always a violent, physical kind of coercion. It can be other types of things. But I do think, I really do take your point that after all of this time, there have been no criminal charges, and it doesn't seem as though any investigations up to this point have resulted in any criminal findings.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this woman has taken to the internet, and every day she makes these allegations, very serious allegations that have ruined someone's career and really harmed their life. I mean, Hammer told me that he attempted suicide, and she's been able to do this all through Instagram every day. And she has the opportunity to press charges. She has the opportunity. We have a legal system, a justice system in this country for adjudicating criminal acts, and she has not pursued that. And so I think it's really, I think she's doing a lot of damage to the cause of MeToo and to women who have been harmed by men and have been the victims of sexual violence. I think it's really unfortunate that we have a case here, a very high-profile case, that can be used to discredit, unfortunately, legitimate claims of sexual abuse and violence.
So now you have Armie Hammer in a position that some other male celebrities or prominent people have found themselves in, where they've been canceled. They're no longer, their professional opportunities were abruptly cut off as a result of accusations that have not been substantiated in court or through any kind of formal process. And there is at least some reason to doubt. I'm sure many very sort of activist people or many survivors' rights people will continue to believe them. A lot of other people will have questions. That's just kind of where it is, right? There's no formal mechanism for adjudicating accusations that are just in the public dialogue. So where does someone like Armie Hammer go from here? Is there going to be would you expect that is anyone in Hollywood going to maybe change their mind, is going to say, oh, actually nothing really came of this, he could be brought back maybe in the fullness of time? What is the trajectory look like? I mean, I think we're kind of struggling with this as a society, what to do with people who were viciously Me Too'd, but then nothing more came from that, and maybe there's been a rethinking of if all of those were accurate.
I should add that, he's not saying that he didn't do anything wrong in these relationships. He told me that he acted like an asshole, and with some of these women, that it was in between him separating from his wife and these accusations coming out. He dated a succession of women, and he says that he did not recognize the power imbalance, that he was a rich and famous celebrity dating younger women, and that he probably should have been more cognizant of the fact that perhaps some of these women agreed to doing things in the kind of BDSM practice that they might not have agreed to in other circumstances. And he regrets that. And so he's acknowledging that he's that he does share some of the blame here for what's happened to him. But again, he draws a line between, acting like an asshole, to use his words, perhaps being insensitive and, moving on from one woman to the next, as people in that position often do. He wants to distinguish between that sort of behavior, which is not criminal, as obnoxious as it might be. It's not criminal. And he wants to draw a line between that behavior and criminal activity, which he's adamant he never committed.
Yeah, it's also. Sorry,
go ahead.
I was just going to note that it's worth noting that there are behaviors that could be worthy of sanction, I think, in a professional context that aren't criminal.
Sure.
Let's say Jeffrey Toobin pleasuring himself on air accidentally, or say a Louis C.K. situation where you're in nightclubs and exposing yourself to other female performers. You can see a situation where there are professional consequences, even if it's not criminally liable. But this all did seem to also happen in the context of his private life.
Absolutely. And this goes back to the earlier point. I do think there's an element of kink shaming here. I mean, we might find some of these fetishes and sexual interests to be weird or odd, or some of us might even find them disgusting. But, as long as it's between consensual adults, I don't really think it's the role of our society, and certainly not our government and legal system, to be penalizing people for them. As in terms of him making a comeback or not, again, I think it's going to come down to individuals making up their own minds. I mean, Louis C.K. has pretty much made a successful comeback. He performed in Madison Square Garden last week. Mm-hmm. And he has fans who want him back, and it's ultimately going to be up to the studio gods in Hollywood and to the producers and the directors and other actors to decide whether or not they want to work with him again.
Very interesting stuff. I thought at the time, and still think, there might have been a rush to judgment in this case. So thank you, Jamie, for shining some light on this very interesting piece. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We'll have more Rising right after this.